Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 172 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I am your host, Mike Ialon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and author of the book, From Letters to Leaders, Creating Impact on Your College Campus and Beyond. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority leaders together. Fun fact, I brought with me 20 books on Tuesday night to a program at Morehead State University in Kentucky, and they wanted signatures on every single copy of the book that I had. When I showed the remaining line of students that I had no more books left, and I pointed to the empty box, the next student online asked me to sign the cardboard box so he could take that back to his dorm room, and he proudly displayed the box to all of his fraternity brothers. So I have to give him points for creativity. If you're out there, kudos to you. So today we have a special treat for all of our listeners. We have with us Dr. Ron Binder, Coe College in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Ron speaks nationally on risk management and alcohol and substance abuse. He's also been cited in Newsweek, NBC Nightly News, National Public Radio's Talk of the Nation, and also Court TV. Ron is a seasoned professional with extensive experience in Greek affairs, speaking around the country at Sigma Phi Epsilon leadership programs, and traveling to Greece with 17 students from the national fraternity to study Greek philosophy. Just totally amazing. If you want to understand Greek affairs, you better call Ron. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ron Binder.
Well, thank you for having me. That's a wild introduction. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, it's my pleasure. I love talking to you. So I'm so glad that we have this opportunity together. I've been looking forward to this for a while now. And, you know, I want our audience to know a little bit about your background. I think that's helpful. You decided on the University of Toledo for your undergraduate experience. So I'm wondering, why was Toledo the right choice for you?
Well, I'd love to tell you I did an extensive search, nationwide search, looked at everything here. No, actually, like a lot of students, I went to the college that was closest to my home. I'm fortunate I had a great teacher in high school that took me there. He was an alum and showed me the campus and said, this could be your future, which is interesting because that was not necessarily my path. Because I always tell students, I said, keep in mind, I said, you never know where life's going to take you. And so once I got turned on to education, that was a great choice. I got to know some great students there. And of course, I joined my fraternity there. They were the sharpest guys on campus. And I said, you know what, if I can be half as sharp as these guys by my senior year, I'm going to be a really nice guy. And so they got involved in a lot of things. If it wasn't my fraternity brothers, I probably would not be in a student affairs profession for all these years. So they were just a great influence. And I tell students, if you leave your college or university as satisfied as I left the University of Toledo, you're going to leave pretty darn satisfied. It was a great time.
I love that story. And you know what, same thing with me. I did absolutely no research in choosing which undergraduate school to get to attend. For me, it was the University of Buffalo, only because my best friend, who was a year older than I was, he was already attending UB and he was having a good time. This is how I decided on which college to go to. I mean, we did no research, none.
You know, the thing to keep in mind is for a lot of college students, that's how they select their college and everything like that. So a lot of it is what you select, but also it's what you make of the experience and everything like that. And we've got 3,800 college universities in this country, and I think they provide students with a very good experience. They just have to take advantage of everything that's there for them.
I agree completely. That's fantastic. And while you were getting your master's degree at Bowling Green, you were a house dad at Lambda Chi Alpha and Phi Gamma Delta. So what was that experience like, being a house dad?
Well, it's interesting. That program produces more Greek advisors than any other college or master's program in the country. And part of it was because the university owned all the fraternity and sorority houses. And so each house had a house dad or house mom in them. And the person who's head of the program, Wayne Colvin, who I learned a lot about, is a legendary name in fraternity and sorority advising. His theory was this: you already know your own fraternity, so you need to get to know someone else's. And so that's the reason why I said, well, I want to be the SIGEP house dad. He says, I think you already know SIGEP. You need to, if you want to be a Greek advisor, you need to know someone else. So our title actually, by the way, was unit director. which I could not understand who made up that title. And so I said to the guy, I said, do you mind if you call me House Dad? And they said, we'd love it, because that defines a little bit more of who you are and what you're doing for us. I still keep in touch with the guys among their composite back in Bowling Green. I was back there about 20 years ago, and some guy says, you, come here, come here, come here. They took me upstairs, he put into the composite. All I can say is I had a lot more hair back then, and my taste in clothing probably was not as good as it is now. But I still keep in touch with the guys. Whenever I'm in town, we try and keep up with each other. So I'd like to think that I was their favorite house dad. But I learned a lot about fraternities and sororities with that to complement my own knowledge, my own fraternity. So it made me, I think, a much better Greek advisor.
Yeah, I'm jealous that you had that experience. I've never been a house dad, and I would have loved the experience. And you know what? I really wish that more fraternities and sororities would have that house dad, house mom that's living in. I feel like we could solve a lot of problems if that was kind of like a mandatory thing, don't you think?
Well, I wish we had go back in time, back in the late 60s when we were changing a lot of things in the country, a lot of laws and everything. We then said to the fraternities, okay, the house moms left. And I wish we could go back in time and kind of reverse that decision. Well, it's not the perfect answer or anything. I do think it means a lot, it changes things. And of course, nowadays, a lot of fraternities like my own have gone substance free. And that, I think, creates an environment where it makes it easy if we ever wanted to get back to that. And so that, I think, is important with that, because, I think young men nowadays, they're looking for role models. And I think they want somebody that they can look up to. They want some adult presence in their life. I work a lot of volunteers with SIGEP, and I said, guys, you think you're stepping on the toes of the undergraduates? Their advice to me is, please step on our toes. Please be involved with us. We want you there. We want you mentoring us. We want your advice. And so that's why I think the house dad thing was a good thing. I learned a lot, and I think they learned a lot from me.
I think that's a unique differentiator for fraternities and sororities. Gen Z wants that mentorship. Certainly they want careers and jobs, but they also want that mentorship. And so if fraternities and sororities could provide that in the form of a house dad, a house mom, I think that's a big value add that they can't get maybe in other places on campus. So I love that. And of course, you have your doctorate. Talk to us about your dissertation at the University of Georgia. I was reading online that it was called The Environmental Influences on Academic Achievement in Fraternities. Tell us more about that dissertation.
Well, I would love to tell you it was a grand design, but what it really came down to was this. When I came to be the Greek advisor at the University of Georgia, one of the things they did there was they had all the fraternities and sororities register their parties. And so on the grade report, of course, we had the number, the chapter name, had the number of members and the GPA, and we also had the number of social events. And so one time the SAE consultant was in my office, and I said, you guys didn't do very good with grades, kind of at the bottom of the list. I said, but they were number one in one thing. And he said, what's that? I said, they had the most social events of any group for that semester. And so, of course, we concluded that, if you have more social events, you'll have lower grades and everything. So I thought about that, and that was my advice. But then something clicked in me. It was my stats class back in Bowling Green, a master. And so I pulled up the stats book, and I said, no, you can't base it on one. So I had 30 groups. So I did a correlation. The correlation was about 0. Wow. So I said, well, wait a minute. So does that say the outlier? And so the answer was yes. And so as I was working on my dissertation, my major professor said, I think you stumbled upon something. Is there some things that you assume about scholarship in fraternities and sororities that you have no data to back it up with? And I said, that's true. There's a lot of things we say. I was giving time management, study skills and time management workshop. I'd say, well, if you sit in the front row, you're going to get 1 letter grade higher than if you sit in the back row and everything like that. And then it dawned on me, okay, I've said this about 57 times. Is there any really study that says that? So I started looking into the thing. So what I wanted to know was, in a nutshell, is how does one person get, particularly a fraternity guy, get a first-year GPA, not a first semester, but first-year GPA? What are the most important influences on there? Because we talk about a lot that could be influences. And so what I did was I sat down with the group, and they gave me a lot of thoughts. And so he said, well, maybe it's chapter size, because maybe if you're a big chapter, it's harder to get grades. Maybe it's a small chapter, it's hard to get good grades. Maybe if you're older, maybe if you joined when you were 20 or 21 versus joining at 18. Maybe if you live in the house, maybe you don't live in the house. Came up with 16 different factors, some of which I knew didn't make any difference, but I threw it in the formula anyways, because in multiple regression analysis, you can put as many factors as you want in there. And we put it in there. It turns out after I tracked a whole cohort of 500 students for a whole year at a large Southern public university. And so I ended up doing the formula, and it turned out there were only 3 things that their biggest influence, significant influence. There were other influences, but none of them rose to the level of mathematical significance. One was your high school GPA, and that high school GPA and SAT score. So that was one thing. Second was the highest degree you hope to obtain, so versus bachelor's, master's, or doctorate. And then the third was the chapter GPA. Everything else in terms of big chapter, medium chapter, small chapter, live in the house, don't live in the house, all those factors meant nothing. They really didn't mean hardly anything. So what that told me was, okay, so quit talking about the things that don't matter. Let's talk about the things that do matter. So every campus that I subsequently went to, it was interesting. You had to put down, if you're required to register for recruitment, you had to put down your SAT score, and you also had to put down what's the highest degree you hope to obtain. And then we gave out the chapter GPA rankings. And so we put that together, and that certainly has made a big influence with that. So the chapter GPA is a significant factor. And one little funny story about that, a mom called me one time. I was at the campus being the Greek advisor. She said, my son is going through fraternity recruitment. Can you send me the information? I said, sure. So I sent her your GPA rankings and everything. She called me back. She said, well, I got the rankings and everything after recruitment. So I want you to know my son did not make a very good choice.
That's hilarious.
There are outliers in the system, so you can do that. So ever since then, I've been interested in scholarship, and because of that, I'm now the national president for Gamma Sigma Alpha Academic Honor Society for Fraternities and Sororities, and we look at studies and we look at that and we present on scholarships. So that's been kind of my area for the past 30 years now.
Well, I want to plant a seed in your brain, which is that if I ever get around to writing my own dissertation, I've been toying around with this idea of chasing a PhD. I wanted to investigate looking at the correlation between chapter GPA and some of the risk management problems that we've seen. We can obviously pinpoint a lot of the really big hazing cases where you have an injury or, God forbid, a death. We can document all of that and we know where that is. Could we go back in time, look at the GPA for that particular chapter, and actually see in advance that there was a problem, that somehow there was this precipitous fall in GPA and or new member GPA right before the incident happened? And maybe we can use that as a predictor to say, if you see this, then you need to start digging in, because it's very possible that you could have a risk management problem on your hands. What do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting. I was at a big university. They asked me to be a consultant with them on a big panel to talk about over many, many months. They wanted what they call an early warning radar detector system. So basically, can we predict when the chapter is really starting to go off the rails? Can we do that? And we looked at a lot of different factors, and unfortunately, there was not time to actually do some studies, formal studies. But the one thing they said was, what are some data points that would point to that? GPA was certainly one of them with that. There were some other things. That there was no production of service to any degree or philanthropy by the chapter, things like that. They weren't involved on campus. They were a very insular chapter and things like that. I think Dyad Strategies has done a really good studies on there about their sense of belonging. I think that's a little harder to measure. Some of the stuff that's easy to measure about service hours, stuff like that, it gives you a little bit of surface indication with that. But certainly, the best behavior or future behavior is past behavior. And so certainly if you have a chapter that has some bad behaviors, making some poor risk management decisions, that if something isn't intervened, something's going to happen. And it's not going to be very good. And some of that is also tied into the campus culture. Because sometimes if the chapter's having a problem, sometimes they're not isolated, they're not the only ones. It's the campus culture. It certainly either helps or hurts that and everything. And certainly, as I've been, I think I've been about 100 different campuses throughout my career talking about risk management. And the one thing that I talk to them about is to say, can I meet with the Greek leaders, a couple hours ahead of time, and you tell me what the issues are, because I don't want to give this wonderful speech, not even a great speech, but I don't want to give a speech that has no relevancy to the campus. Right. So I said, tell me what the issues are and give me some specific examples, because I want to be able to make that speech very tailored right to the campus and everything. And I will tell you, they're brutally honest. And they're brutally honest about the culture, and they're also brutally honest about each other, because they're able to say, this is the problem. Our problems are we've got a handful of chapters that do this. And that's the pattern that I see sometimes across the country with that. Because by and large, our fraternity sorority leaders, particularly chapter presidents, they want a good experience for their members, because they probably had a good experience themselves. And so that's something that they want, and they want to make sure that they can do it not only with their chapter, but also in an environment that supports that. And that's something that they very much want. We talk about the peer influence of fraternities and sororities. It's an incredible peer influence among all the chapters.
So smart. You've worked at a variety of institutions. You've worked at the University of Georgia, UNC Chapel Hill, Bowling Green, University of South Carolina, University of Pittsburgh at Bradford, and now Coe College. And I'm wondering, how is this community that you're at now at Coe, how is that different from all of these other experiences that you've had?
Well, a couple things. First of all, we're a small private liberal arts college. And so the other schools are what I call humongous state schools,
Mhm.
who had a lot of fraternities. In fact, it's not uncommon that the first three schools you mentioned, their fraternity and sorority committee was larger than this whole college.
Wow.
So that's kind of interesting to see about that. But there's some common, there's some very much differences. Everything that, but there's also some commonalities, particularly with fraternities and sororities. The basic thing that they're all looking for is they're looking for a sense of belonging. They're looking for a sense of brotherhood and sisterhood. That is fundamental across all college universities when it comes to fraternities and sororities, and that's something that they're all looking for in one form or another. Everything. The kind of difference here is we don't have houses here. We have wings on our residence halls, so we do that to support our fraternities and sororities. So we don't have the pressure necessarily to fill houses like some of the large state universities do. So they don't have that. And we also don't have a lot of venues for them to have a lot of social events, which is interesting because we come full circle, because as more and more fraternities and sororities, of course, sororities have always done this, but fraternities do not have, they go substance free. They're having to have events in what we call third party vendors. Well, places like Coe College, they've never had a chapter house. So they've always had to use a third party vendor. So it's kind of interesting discussion. When SIGEP was debating to go substance free, my home chapter at the University of Toledo had been substance free for 20 years. And they're sitting on the meeting going, what is the big deal? Why don't you guys get it? You don't have to have alcohol in the house to have a fraternity experience.
Right.
So I think there's some fundamental things that are the same. There's certainly some differences and everything. The size here dictates the chapters aren't nearly as big, things like that. But there's not that pressure in terms of facilities to fill them and things like that. So there's not that. There's also not quite the social pressure. You get a large state college universities, there's a lot of social pressure there. And I think, unfortunately, it forces some chapters and some leaders to sometimes make not the greatest decisions in terms of risk management because they all want to fit in so much. And so there's a little more pressure at those schools than here. I don't have nearly as much risk management stuff here. I'm not the Greek advisor here. This is actually the first place I've not been the fraternity and sorority advisor. So I get to kind of watch it from a distance a little bit and see, but they do a really good job here.
I love it. And I got to hear more about this, because at one point you traveled to Greece with 17 students from the national fraternity to study Greek philosophy. Talk to us about what that experience was like, because I want to go check that out.
Well, I wish I could say I took credit for it. I can't. The program is already up and running. I think this year was our 10th year of doing it. Actually, not 20 years of doing it. It started out as one of our alums was on at UNC Chapel Hill, was on a study abroad trip. And he went to Greece, and they heard about a thing called sound mind and sound body, which is one of our philosophies. He says, wait a minute, that's not SIGEP didn't invent sound mind, sound body. He said, no, actually the Greeks did a few years before us. And so when he came back, he proposed to the national board that we do this. So what we do is we pick about 17 students from across the country. Your criteria is you probably can't have a well-worn passport, because we're not interested in sending somebody to their 20th country or something like that. We have people that have never really traveled before. And so obviously they're very high-performing folks and everything like that. And we get hundreds of applications. Thank goodness I don't have to select them. I just have to be the mentor on it. So I've done this twice now on this trip. And so what we do is we don't stay in Athens. We actually go around the country. And so it's a bus tour, and it's a lot of hiking. They didn't tell me that the first time I was there. And Greece, if you've ever been to Greece, there's no flat piece of ground anywhere in Greece. It's all hills and it's all rocks. It's beautiful, but it's a lot of hiking. And so the one hike was get to the top. And by the way, Americans with Disabilities Act is not a part of Greece. So there's not a lot of handrails. So we're climbing on the stairs. We had to go up 1,000 steps to get to the top, and that's where we all gathered. So, but it was a fascinating trip because you had to read 3 books on Greek history and culture, and then we brought along a professor of Greek culture. And so they would give a lecture in the morning, and then we'd do some hiking, some things. We went to the original Olympic site, which is kind of cool. And so we just all over Athens and everything. So you didn't get a lot of rest. And the last night, you just didn't go to sleep because you just didn't want it to end. It was a great trip. Guys from different chapters and everything. And it was nice. It opened up the eyes to some of the guys saying, yeah, I know you joined your chapter, but you joined something larger called the National Fraternity. And you've got brothers that if you're having a great undergraduate experience, us alums, we're having even a better alumni experience. So it was a great time.
What a great experience. I would do that in a heartbeat. That sounds absolutely fantastic. One of the things that I think about now, especially everything that we've been through over these last 18 months with the pandemic, there's a lot of pressure on the fraternity and sorority advisors right now. I mean, they're being asked to do all kinds of things. You know, I was speaking to one advisor on a campus recently that she was basically changing the beds in the dorms where the students were being sent to after they ended up getting this COVID test coming back positive. So the quarantine beds, that's, you know, your duty now. So, you know, you served as national president of AFA, the Association of Fraternity and Sorority Advisors. How can we better support the fraternity and sorority advisors given their limited resources and much smaller FSL offices, because many of them are operating as an office of one person?
It's a big challenge out there. And, you know, when we think of fraternity and sorority offices, we think of sometimes the large state schools where they have 2 and 3 and maybe 4, even 5 staff members, something like that. I have never been a part of it except for Bowling Green. Usually every place, I was the only person. When I was at UNC Chapel, I was the only Greek advisor there. And I had 50 chapters and about 3,000 students and 4 councils. So it was simply amazing. I think part of a couple of things to support that. I think part of it is making sure that the people that supervise them make sure that they are giving them the rough resources. One thing we've seen now is some increase in pay and everything, because people realize you're asking them to do a lot of things that are very complicated, and so you need to do that, particularly in relation to other student affairs positions and everything. You know, student affairs generally is a position, is a profession that it does tax you. So this fall, we're moving people into housing and stuff like that. Yeah, we're doing a lot of the same things up until 7, 8 o'clock at night, trying to make sure we got everything ready to go. But in terms of our fraternity and sorority folks, I think part of it, I think the national fraternities can do a lot of support with them to make sure that they're providing them the advice and the strong support for their chapters, particularly with their advisors and everything. We've seen a lot of national fraternities and sororities do a much better job of getting some good advisors that are backing up the fraternity and sorority professional on the campus. So I think that's part of it. I think there's also a lot more advocacy on the part of AFA and NASPA, Fraternity and Sorority Knowledge Community, with these CEOs, Chief Student Affairs Officers, saying, if you want all this stuff to happen and you want longevity and everything, then you need to start paying. And so we are seeing a little uptick in that. We're seeing a little bit more averages bumping up just a little bit more. Because on a lot of campuses, it's considered an entry-level positions. And on the majority of campuses, not only are they only fraternity and sorority professional, but they're probably also a hall director. So they've got all that stuff going on with that. So I think part of it is also groups such as yours, making sure that you provide some outside expertise. Because a lot of times fraternity and sorority professionals are asked to be an expert on a lot of things. There's no way they can be an expert on. So I think that's important. I think also the last thing is professional development. I think that's so important. One of the things that I've done over the years, and I started on it many, many years ago, is I've sent over 50 people to the AFA conference over the past 20 to 30 years. And my preference is this: you have to be the only fraternity and sorority professional going from the campus. Because there's a lot of people out there that are wearing many different hats. And so I said, you know what, they can't go to everything because they may be a hall director, they may be student activities, and there's a lot of professional organizations that may buy for their time. I said, but at least if AFA, I'll pay for you guys to go there. And so that's been very gratifying for me. I get nice little thank you notes from them for folks. And I think that's important for professional development for them to do that. So that's what I think is important to help support our fraternities and sororities.
That's amazing. Good for you. I love everything about that. We should speak about risk management and substance and alcohol abuse. You've been cited just about everywhere. How can fraternities and sororities reduce their risk this fall as students are looking to ramp up all the social events that they missed out on over the last 18 months?
Well, we hope we don't go back to where we were 2 years ago because we were making a lot of progress on that. And the pandemic actually helped us a little bit with that, because I think what it started doing is telling chapters and everything, let's rethink what a social event is, what our purpose is for us gathering, things like that. I can still remember back in the 80s when we thought fraternities and sororities, our responsibility was to provide programming for the campus. We were there to provide the party for the campus and everything. And we got out of that a long time ago with that. And I hope we just never return to that, because that was a very small blip in the long history of fraternities and sororities. I think part of this is make sure that you're educated on the rules and the policies and why behind it. Our national fraternities and sororities, for the most part, do a pretty good job with that. I do a lot of work at SIGEP with my chapters to make sure that they understand, here's the rules, here's the reason why the rule is there. But also have them get some fundamental thought of, what are we trying to do with our social events? We can plan the greatest social event in the world with risk management, but if the whole point is just to stand around and drink, We need to do something different than that, because we're not preparing them for life beyond college. Because you and I, we go to a lot of cocktail parties and everything like that, and alcohol is just there. It's a side thing. It's nice. I love my glass of Cabernet and everything like that, and have a discussion with somebody. But that's not the focus. The focus is the interaction with someone else, having nice conversations with people. That's the whole point. And that's something I try and talk to them about. Let's not get caught up so much in the rules. Yeah, we got to follow the rules. Here's the reason why. But let's talk about fundamentally why we're trying to get together. Because when you talk about social, our founders did not mean social as in social event. It meant social in the ways of the world. And that's the one thing that fraternities and sororities do. They prepare members to be great members after college. One of the things that I started doing with my chapter is, in order to get to the final initiation, you had to go to an etiquette dinner. And they were wondering, why are we doing this and everything like that? And I'll never forget, a person came back and said, you know what? He said, I had to have dinner with the university president. All the chapter presidents had dinner, had lunch with the college president. And he said, you know what? He said, I was nervous, but I knew what fork to use. He said, so I didn't have to worry about that. So I could have a conversation. And meanwhile, everyone around me is looking like, okay, which fork do we use? What do we use? Stuff like that. He said, I could have a nice conversation with the university president, and everyone else was worrying about what fork they're going to use. So I think those things are important. Some people may think they're a little outdated. I don't think so. I think that stuff is very important for our members. But to me, having a good education program about why, and I do that for SIGEP, my chapters. I work with chapters here in Iowa, and I do a lot of risk management talk with them. And we do a lot of talking about, let's talk about what our purpose is. Why are we here as a fraternity, and what are we trying to do?
I love it. I absolutely love that approach. The other thing that I think about is liability insurance, because the premiums continue to ramp up in the fraternal world. I'm sure you're seeing that at SIGEP, and certainly I've seen it in my own organization. And I think all of it goes back to this conversation about student conduct and some of the issues that we're seeing around the country. Is this model sustainable? I mean, are we going to reach a point where the undergraduates are no longer going to be able to pay the liability insurance premiums?
And the short answer, yes, it is not sustainable. In fact, I remember being quoted one time with a big national fraternity had to change their new member education program and kind of get rid of what they were doing. And so the Wall Street Journal, I don't know how they got my number. They called me and they said, give us some thoughts on this. And I said, I don't know their motivation. I'm not on their national board, but here's the one thing I know is when your losses start piling up more than your premiums, you're going to price yourself out of existence. And that is not a sustainable model. And that's the thing about liability insurance. Now, I can remember when there was no liability insurance because the age of consent was 21. So it's a little different than it is nowadays. But the one thing we have to know is, the insurance companies operate a pretty basic principle. You got to take in more in premiums than you pay out in damages. And when you start paying out more in damages, then your premiums go up. For some schools, their members, they can afford high premiums. But for the majority of our fraternity and sorority communities across the country, they simply cannot afford those premiums. And really what they're doing is they're pricing themselves out of existence.
Yeah.
And so the one thing insurance companies are forcing national fraternities to do is to say, you got to get a hold of these things. Because if you don't, we're going to just keep upping your premiums, and to the point where you're just going to be out of business. And this is not a sustainable model. Fortunately, in SIGEP, we made some decisions a couple of years ago that aren't give our undergraduates a lot of credit. We decided to go substance free. We got rid of all of our pledging programs and things like that. And we've had a great track record the last few years with that. Knock on wood, we've had some really good decisions by our undergraduate members. And I think that's where kind of the model is going with other national fraternities, because again, you can price yourself totally out of existence. What you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up only being able to exist in a very narrow band of schools where money is probably not an issue.
Right. I completely agree with you. And kudos to SIGEP. I mean, between the balanced man and the substance-free model, I mean, I just think you're making all the right decisions. I mean, I have to be very honest and frank about that. So I love where you're going. I love SIGEP. I think you're doing all the right things. And I hope that the other organizations are looking at some of those trends and saying, you know what, maybe that's kind of the road that we all have to head down. And it kind of goes back to that other conversation about getting away from the social events and thinking about what are we really here for. We need to get into the leadership business, right? That's really where we need to be.
That's right. That's right.
So
I'll give our undergraduates a lot of credit. They made some really good decisions, tough decisions. I mean, it wasn't unanimous and everything, but we think we made some good decisions on that, and some other decisions about how we want to run the fraternity. And we're not alone. There are some other national fraternities. I'll give Phi Delta a lot of credit. A very large national fraternity. They went down the substance-free route many, many years ago, and we actually took a little bit of playbook from theirs and looked at them. And what they found 10 years later is they had more chapters, they had stronger chapters, far less premium increases and claims and everything like that, and they had more volunteers engaged. And that's important because I work with volunteers in the fraternity a lot. The one thing they would say is, I want to mentor, I want to do all this stuff, but can I do it in this environment that's safe?
Yeah.
Yes, you can. I can't guarantee it, but here's what we're trying to do. And they go, that I will volunteer for.
Thank goodness for the volunteers. Thank goodness for volunteers like you going out and doing the work that you're doing there in Iowa. That's just incredible. And we really owe a debt of gratitude to all the people that do that, both for the fraternity side and the sororities. It's just incredible. So this has been just really enlightening. Now, we do love good food here at Fraternity Foodie. And I'm wondering, the next time that I come and visit Cedar Rapids, I'm going to be looking to you for a recommendation in terms of where I need to eat. So what's your favorite restaurant in town?
My favorite, Mas Margaritas. Morgan and I love Mexican food, and so we can't get enough of it. So we have a lot of friends there. We meet up there and everything like that. But it's a great place. It's got a great atmosphere. Food is good, and the restaurant is just a very nice place to eat. So
I love it. I love it. I miss the Mexican food. Here in Nashville, Tennessee, you can get as much barbecue as you want, but the Mexican food is just not up to par. It's just not quite hitting the mark. It's almost like trying to get, good pizza or a good bagel in Nashville. I can't find it. I just can't find it. So that's really helpful. That's great. All right. So if our listeners, if they want to contact you and they want some risk management programming on their campus to help reduce risk, where's the best place for them to go and to connect with you?
Easiest thing is just to send me an email, and my email is simply Ron Binder, B-I-N-D-R, it looks like binder, Ron Binder @yahoo.com. I think I have one of the original Yahoo accounts in the country, so it's a pretty simple one. I have no numbers after my name or anything like that. So just send me an email. That's the best way to start the conversation. And then we can have some conversations about what do we need to do. Sometimes I just spend time on the phone consulting with people doing that. Sometimes they want to bring me to campus. Sometimes they want to bring me to campus and, hey, can you bring us an extra day and just meet with all of our leaders and do some individual things. Sometimes I'm asked to do things with not just fraternities and sororities, but also student organizations. So I remember at one campus where they said, hey, any way to squeeze in all the student organization presidents there? They said, sure, bring them on. We can talk about it and everything. But I love having and my favorite thing is having dinner with the fraternity and sorority leaders. That's great, because after a few minutes, they finally say, okay, let me tell you how it really is. Now I know. I was doing a program review actually at one, I won't say what college, university was, but it was rather large. And it was interesting. Within about 2 hours, I think I knew every secret they have, because they were talking about this is what we do and everything like that. But they said it for a good reason. They said, we need to tell you this because, again, we don't want you to write this report and say everything's great. And things are really good here, but here's some things we really need you to concentrate on, because if we can solve that, we can be an even better fraternity and sorority community. So I just love it when I come to a campus and do things like that. So it energizes me like crazy. So I love it.
You and me both. I get so much energy in working with the fraternity and sorority leaders that I can't describe it. So I really appreciate all the work that you do. I also think you and I are probably the only ones with the Yahoo email address that we still use. But I think I was number 2. You were the first person to get that email address. I was the second. So there you go.
Still works. My younger staff members, what's Yahoo? It was around before you were born. Never mind.
I don't know how much longer Yahoo's going to be in business, so I think we're going to have to shift over to Gmail or something else.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. But yeah, just send me a note, and I'll be glad to have a conversation. And I really enjoy doing that and talking to people, particularly talking to fraternity sorority leaders. And I'll only say one thing about fraternity sorority leadership. Maybe my last comment on that is, as I look at the landscape of student organizations and everything like that, I think some of the toughest leadership positions we have are our fraternity and sorority presidents. I think they're in the hot seat a lot. And so I find that we need to make sure we support them as much as we can, because if we've got a good fraternity and sorority president, we're going to make a lot of progress in that chapter and everything. And we know that for a lot of reasons and everything. So that we make sure we support them as much as we possibly can.
Amen. I hope that we do. Thank you so much, Ron. This has been absolutely spectacular. Send an email to Ron. His email address is ronbinder@yahoo.com. I know that all of our fraternity and sorority leaders are going to like this and then share that with other students on campus. And we hope to see everybody on another episode of Fraternity Foodie. Thanks so much for your help here, Ron. And we will see you all next time. Thanks again.
Take care.